The restaurant buzzed with quiet chatter, silverware clinking against fine china, and the soft hum of jazz drifting through the speakers. It was one of those high-end places where every waiter wore a pressed uniform and smiles that didn't always reach their eyes. Among them was Lila, a shy young waitress in her early 20s. Her light brown skin glowed under the warm lights, and her big brown eyes always seemed to hold both kindness and caution. She moved carefully, as if the world might shatter if she took one wrong step. That night, she was assigned to a corner table that made her palms sweat, the table reserved for Jonathan Hale, one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. A billionaire with a reputation for arrogance, Jonathan wasn't known for his patience. But tonight he wasn't alone. Across from him sat an older woman with silvery hair tied neatly in a bun, her soft eyes scanning the room with a distant sadness. That was Jonathan's mother, Margaret Hale, and she was deaf. Lila didn't notice at first. She approached the table, her voice soft. "Good evening, sir, ma'am. Would you like to start with something to drink?" Jonathan barely looked up. "She can't hear you," he said curtly, his tone sharp enough to slice through her nerves. "Just take our order. I'll tell you what she wants." Lila's heart sank, but she nodded. Yet something about the woman's gentle expression, the way she smiled faintly and tapped her fingers on the table rhythmically, made Lila pause. She recognized that movement. It wasn't random. It was sign language. Lila hesitated, then slowly raised her hands. With trembling fingers, she signed, "Hello, how are you?" For a moment, Margaret froze. Then her eyes widened and filled with light. A slow, radiant smile spread across her face as she signed back. "You know how to sign?" Jonathan looked up from his phone, startled. His brows furrowed as he watched them exchange signs, confusion flashing into irritation. "What's going on?" he asked. Lila, cheeks flushed, quickly explained. I studied sign language in college. My sister was deaf." Margaret's hands moved quickly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're the first person outside my family to sign to me in years," she signed. Lila smiled back, her own eyes moist. For the rest of the evening, Margaret and Lila communicated effortlessly, laughing silently, hands dancing in the air. Margaret's joy was contagious, filling the corner of the restaurant with something tender and rare. Jonathan sat there watching in stunned silence. For the first time in years, he saw his mother alive. Really alive. When the meal ended, Margaret reached for Lila's hand, signing softly, "Thank you." "You made me feel human again." Lila smiled, signing back, "You are more than human. You're beautiful." Jonathan cleared his throat awkwardly. "That's enough," he muttered, throwing a few $100 bills on the table. But his voice cracked, barely noticeable, but enough for Lila to see something shifting behind his cold mask. The next morning, Jonathan showed up at the restaurant again. Lila's heart dropped when she saw him standing by the counter in his tailored suit. His jaw was tight, and the manager's anxious expression didn't help. "Lila, my office." "Now!" the manager barked. Minutes later, she stood trembling in front of Jonathan. "You talked to my mother last night," he said flatly. "Yes," she whispered. She's wonderful." His eyes softened for a fraction of a second before turning hard again. "She hasn't smiled like that since my father died." "I don't know what you did, but thank you." Then he hesitated. "Can you come with me?" Lila blinked, confused. "Sir?" He didn't explain. He simply gestured for her to follow. They drove in silence to a sprawling estate on the city's outskirts. Marble columns, manicured lawns, the kind of place that looked too perfect to be real. Inside, Margaret was sitting by a window, sunlight spilling across her frail frame. When she saw Lila, she signed excitedly, "You came back!" Lila signed back with a smile. "I promised I would." As they signed, Jonathan stood back, watching. A man used to control, now watching something he couldn't command. His mother's laughter filled the room, soundless yet powerful. Finally, Margaret looked up at her son and signed something. Jonathan frowned. "What did she say?" he asked. Lila hesitated. "She said, 'She wants you to stop hiding your heart.'" Jonathan's throat tightened. He turned away, staring out the window. "She always says that," he murmured, his voice trembling slightly. But as he looked back at his mother, her soft eyes filled with love, her hands gently clasped around Lila's, he felt something break open inside him. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan insisted on hiring Lila as his mother's interpreter. But as the days went on, it became clear she was more than that. She became the bridge between them. Through her, Margaret told her son stories he had never known, about his father, about love, about forgiveness, and through her, Jonathan learned to listen, not just with his ears, but with his heart. One evening, months later, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. At her funeral, as Jonathan stood beside Lila, tears streaming down his face, he signed shakily, "Thank you for giving me my mother back." Lila reached for his hands, signing softly, "She never left. She's right here." Jonathan smiled through his tears, looking up at the sky. For the first time, he didn't feel alone, and in that silence he understood. Compassion speaks louder than words ever could.